Chapter 44. The Trail on the Sunlit Hills. When young Matt first knew that Sammy had sent Ollie back to the city with no promise to follow, he took to the woods and returned only after miles of tramping over the wildest and roughest part of the country. The big fellow said no word, but on his face was a look that his father understood, and the old mountaineer felt his own blood move more quickly at the sight. But when Sammy with her books was fully established in the Matthews home, and young Matt seemed always, as the weeks went by, to find her reading things that he couldn't understand, he was made to realize more fully what her studies with the shepherd meant. He came to feel that she was already crossing the threshold into that world where Mr. Howitt lived, and thinking that himself could never enter, he grew lonely and afraid. With a quickness that was so marked in her character, Sammy grasped the meaning of his trouble almost before young Matt himself knew fully what it was. Then the girl, with much care and tact, set about helping him to see the truth which the shepherd had revealed to her. All through summer and fall, when the day's work was done or on a Sunday afternoon, they were together, and gradually the woods and the hills, with all the wild life that was in them, began to have more for the young man a new meaning, or rather, he learned little by little to read the message that lay upon those open pages. First a word here and there, and then sentences, and then paragraphs, and soon he was reading alone, as he tramped the hills for stray stock, or looked and worked in the mountain field. The idle days of winter and the long evenings were spent in reading aloud from the books that had come to mean most to her. So she led him on slowly, along the way that her teacher had pointed out to her, but always as they went, he saw her going before, far ahead, and he knew that in the things that men called education, he could never hope to stand by her side. But he was beginning to ask, are there not, after all, things that lay deeper still in life than these? Often he would go to his old friend in the hollow with some thought, and the shepherd, seeing how it was, would smile as he helped the lad on his way. The shepherd looked forward with confidence to the time when young Matt would discover for himself, as Sammy had found for herself, that the only common ground whereupon men and women may lay in safety is the ground of their manhood and womanhood. And so it was, on that spring morning when the young giant felt the red life throbbing strongly in his great limbs as he followed his team to and fro across the field. And in his voice, as he shouted to his horses at the end of the furrow, there was something under the words, something of a longing, something also of a challenge. Sammy was going to spend the day with her friends on Jake Creek. She had not been to see Mandy since the night of her father's death, and as she went, she stopped at the lower end of the field to shout a merry word to the man with the plow, and it was some time later when the big fellow again started his team. The challenge in his tone had grown bolder. Sammy returned that afternoon in time for the evening meal, and Aunt Molly thought, as the girl came up the walk, that the young girl had never looked so beautiful.
"Why, honey," she said, "you're just bubbling over with life. Your cheeks are rosy and your eyes are sparkling. Oh, you're fairly all shining all over. Your ride, it sure did you good, honey."
The young woman replied with a hug that made her admirer gasp.
"Oh, child, you're as strong as a young panther, and you walk like one, too. So strong and easy like."
The girl laughed.
"I hope I don't impress everyone that way, Aunt Molly. I don't believe I want to be like a panther. I'd rather be like... Like what, child?" "Like you. Just like you. The best, the very best woman in the whole world, because you got the best and biggest heart."
She looked back over her shoulder, laughing as she ran to the house. When young Matt came in from the field, Sammy went out to the barn while he was unharnessing his team.
"Are you tired tonight?"
she asked. The big fellow smiled. Tired? Me? I never get tired. Where do you want to go? Haven't you ridden enough today? I should think you'd be tired yourself.
Tired? Me tired? Said the girl. I don't want to ride. I want to go for a walk. It's such a lovely evening, and there's going to be a moon. I've been thinking that I'd like to walk over to home after supper if you'd care to go.
That night, the work within the house and the chores about the barn were finished in a reasonably short time. The young man and the woman started down the old trail like two school children, while the father and mother sat on the porch and heard their voices die away in the moon's light below. The girl went first along the little path, moving with that light, sure step that belonged only to perfect health, the health of the woods and the hills. The man followed, walking with the same sure, easy step, strength and power revealed in every movement of his body. Two splendid creatures they were, masterpieces of the Creator's handiwork, made by him who created man, male and female, and bade them to have dominion over every living thing that moved upon the earth. Kings by divine right. In the belt of timber, where the trail to the ranch branches off, they met the shepherd on his way to the house for an evening visit. The old man paused only long enough to greet them, and pushed on up the hill, for he saw by their faces that the time had come. Sammy had grown very quiet when they rounded the shoulder of Dewey, and they went in silence down to the cabin on the southern slope of the mountain. The girl asked young Matt to wait for her at the gate, and going to the house, she entered alone. A short time she remained in the familiar rooms, and then slipping out through the rear door, ran through the woods to the little glen back of the house. Dropping beside the mound, she buried her face into the cool grass as she whispered,
Oh, Daddy, I wish you were here tonight. This night means so much to me. Do you know how happy I am, Daddy? Do you know? I wonder.
The twilight deepened.
I gotta go, Daddy. I must go to him. You told me you'd trust me anywhere with him, and he's waiting for me now, but I wish you were here tonight, Dad.
Quickly she made her way back to the cabin and passed through the house and rejoined young Matt. The two returned silently up the mountainside to the higher levels where the light still lingered though the sun was down. At the lookout they stopped.
Let's wait for the moon here,
she said, and so seated on the big rock, they watched the last of the evening go out of the west. From forest depth and mountainside came the myriad voices of nature's chorus, blending softly in the evening hymn, and rising clear above the low breath tones, yet in perfect harmony, came a whippoorwill's plaintive call, floating up from the darkness below, the sweet cooing of a wood dove in a tree upon the ridge, and the chirping cricket in a nearby crevice on a ledge. Like shadowy spirits, the bats flitted here and there in the glittering gloom. The two on the mountain shoulders felt themselves alone above it all, yet still part of it. Then the moon looked over the mountain behind them, turning Mutton Hollow into a wondrous sea of misty light, out of which the higher hills lifted their heads like fairy islands. The girl spoke.
Come, Matt. We must go now. Help me down.
He slid from his seat and stood beside the rock with uplifted arms, and Sammy leaned forward and placed her hands upon his shoulders. He felt her breath upon his forehead. The next instant he held her close. And so they went home along the trail that nobody knows how old, and the narrow path that was made by those who walked one before the other, they made wide enough for two. Dad Howitt, returning to the ranch, saw them coming in the moonlight and slipped aside from the path into the deeper shadows. And as they passed, the old scholar, the shepherd, the poet, stood with bowed, uncovered head. And when they were gone, their low voices were heard no longer, he said aloud. What God has joined, what God has joined. And this way runs the trail that leads along the higher sunlit hills where those who journey see afar, and the light lingers even when the day is done. End of chapter 44.